Hello, me again. You'll remember on page 13 of your text, I present this charming little figure of the Masonry Bridge. So I'd like to review this, take this image and review the flow of La Boheme for you. Much of it I've already talked about, but I'd like to put it all together. This is the 4 acts, 1, 2, 3, 4, in the bridge. If you take out a single piece of it, it doesn't fit together well. For those of you who know music form, this opera, the ideal of this opera was that it be through composed, but Italians have terrible trouble with through composition because it doesn't give them a chance to applaud and weep and do all the things that Italians like to do. So, Act 1, you will remember, is basically a quartet plus the landlord, and then the guys leave. It is vivacious. The orchestra is laughing and dancing and doing all sorts of manner of extraordinary things. And Puccini develops the very idea of the Bohemians, La Boheme, in it. And we get to know them. Remember, they are Rodolfo, Marcello, Colline, the bass, and Schonard, the music teacher, who's also a baritone, like Marcello. So remember that everything changes with Mimi's entrance. So remember that the musical form here, the poetry is a mere flood of words and jokes and colloquialisms. The musical form is simply the ensemble. It is a brilliant ensemble. And it covers what we call the exposition of the plot, right? We get to know the environment, this hovel, and we get to know the fact that it's freezing, it's Christmas Eve, and so on and so on and so on. So we are here in the dead of winter, and this winter will continue the next 3 acts. The first 3 acts are in the dead of winter. These first 2 acts are on Christmas Eve, let's say 1831. And the third one is about two months later, let's say late February. Hideously cold. This is an internal scene, so it is domestic. This is an external scene in the streets of Paris. This is an external scene in the outskirts of Paris, and this, in Act 4, is an internal scene. In fact, it is very much like, it is exactly like Act 1 in terms of its environment. But the difference is, it is in spring. And as I'll tell you, that is a great source of irony. So you remember that once Mimi enters, and Puccini gives us a very different music, very much inspired and colored by Richard Wagner in part of it. He then moves into a getting to know you scene in which Mimi faints, then drops her key. Rodolfo and she flirt, they light their candles, they go out again, they touch hands, and who knows what's going to happen. Then Rodolfo has a very demanding and beautiful aria about himself. Then Mimi has perhaps one of the greatest arias in all of opera. Mi chiamano Mimi, I'm called Mimi. Then they have a love duet, rapturous, trembling of the soul, they say. The act ends. Powerful, unique as it ends. Now, Act 2 is a vast choral ensemble. You can have 150 people on the stage. You've got a children's chorus. You've got a regular chorus, a women's chorus. You have lots of extras. You have dancers on the stage. So it's just enormous and huge. And it's just the kind of thing the French love. It's full of local color, even including a marching band for the changing of the guard at midnight on the outskirts of town. The last musical number is a marching band through, which inspires the climax of the act. And that's a pretty good climax for an act of music. Buried in here is a lovely little aria And just as Mimi enters here and inspires a new kind of music and leads to her aria, Musetta, our second leading lady, enters here and sings a splendid little aria, which is really part of the ensemble, and yet it's often performed as a set piece, and you'll see what I mean when you see it. Now, this third act is also in the dead of winter, and it is external. It is in a courtyard in front of a tavern. And it is terribly freezing. It's 5 a.m. in the morning. It's dreadfully cold and damp. And it is essentially a 25-minute quartet. At first, Mimi, then Marcello, then Rodolfo, and finally Musetta. It's little conversations that become duets, and then trios. And finally, there is a magnificent quartet at the end. So the music form here is quite fluid, and it goes from solo, duet, trio, duet, aria. Mimi has another aria, her second aria, and then a lovely duet, which becomes a quartet. It is a comic act. In the beginning of the act, Mimi and Rodolfo are separated and trying to get back together, and Musetta and Marcello are happy as clams. By the end of the act, we're talking about 15 minutes here, Marcello and Musetta have split up and are calling each other names, and you know what happened. Mimi and Rodolfo are back together again. Okay, so the fourth act then, if you'll remember, and you'll see it for yourself, is a mirror, both musically and dramatically, of Act 1. Same scene, but in this act, the first act, love is born. In this act, Mimi comes to Rodolfo to proclaim her love, her undying love for him, and then she dies. She returns to him so she will not have to die alone. Remember Mimi, the loneliest character in all of opera? Sola, 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 she sings over and over again. Returns to her beloved Rodolfo to die in his arms. And musically here, Puccini is enormously ambitious. He reprises music from the first act, but he introduces some new music which is vast and extraordinarily profound and beautiful. You'll really love it. Music of the ocean. Now just, if you would allow me, just a word about imagery. From this text, which is very witty and poetic, we have imagery of spring emerging in winter. So Mimi's imagery represents hope. In the fourth act, we are in spring. And rather than hope and life, we have in spring the season that Mimi dreamt of in the first three acts. We're in spring, and it is in that very season that Mimi dies. So in all of 19th century literature, there's a strong element of irony, and in this opera as well. All this glorious beauty ends in Thanatos, in death. But it was a lovely trip and quite magnificent, and we'll always be in love with Mimi, and we'll always have Paris. Oh, that was a way